We'll proceed with assisted living placement next week, the doctor said, as if I had already agreed to it. Then she looked down at the chart and added, Margaret Ellis, correct? I was sitting right there on the exam table, the thin paper crinkling under me, and somehow the decision about my life had already been made without a single word from my mouth. I adjusted the sleeves of my cardigan, trying to steady my hands. I'm Margaret Ellis, I said, my voice calm but firmer than I felt, and I don't remember agreeing to anything. The room went quiet for half a second, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from confusion but from calculation. The doctor glanced, not at me, but at my daughter-in-law. Rebecca sat in the chair beside the desk, legs crossed neatly, a leather folder open on her lap like she belonged there more than I did. We discussed this during her last visit, Rebecca said smoothly, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Margaret's been having some difficulties managing on her own. I turned my head slowly. Difficulties? I repeated. I drove myself here. Outside the small window, I could see the parking lot of the clinic, rows of sedans and pickup trucks baking under the late morning sun. My Buick was parked 3 spaces from the entrance, exactly where I had left it. The doctor cleared her throat and flipped a page. There are concerns about safety, medication management, daily living activities. Doctor, I interrupted, keeping my tone even. I manage my own medications. I cook. I pay my bills. I was at the grocery store yesterday buying a week's worth of food. Rebecca leaned forward slightly, placing her hand on the desk. She forgets things, she said, gently, like she was explaining something obvious. Last month, she left the stove on. I looked at her, really looked this time. That never happened. She didn't flinch. That was what unsettled me most. No hesitation, no second-guessing, just calm certainty, as if repeating a fact she had rehearsed. Daniel was there, she added. He can't confirm. My son stood near the door, one hand in his pocket, the other holding his phone. He had that distracted look he always wore now, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. It's just, we're trying to make sure you're safe, Mom, he said, not quite meeting. My eyes. Safe. That word hung in the air like it was supposed to comfort me, but it landed differently. It felt like a decision already wrapped up and handed to me as a conclusion. I shifted on the exam table, the paper beneath me making a sharp tearing sound. Safe from what? I asked. No one answered right away. The nurse, standing by the counter, pretended to adjust a tray of supplies. The doctor tapped her pen against the chart. Rebecca simply watched me, patient, composed, as if waiting for me to catch up to something she already understood. Then I noticed it. The chart on the desk wasn't thin like a routine visit file. It was thick, organized with color tabs. I leaned forward slightly, just enough to read the label on the edge. Ellis, Margaret, transition plan. My name, typed neatly, followed by words I had never seen before. My fingers curled against the edge of the table. What is that? I asked, nodding toward the file. The doctor hesitated just for a moment. Rebecca didn't. It's just paperwork, she said. Planning ahead. Planning ahead. I let that phrase settle. Somewhere between the grocery lists on my kitchen counter and the gas receipts still in my purse, someone had been planning a future for me I hadn't agreed to. I swung my legs off the exam table and stood up slowly, the room tilting just enough to remind me of my age, but not enough to weaken my resolve. I'd like to see that file, I said. The doctor looked uncertain. Rebecca closed her folder with a soft snap. Daniel finally looked up, his expression tightening. And in that moment, I realized something far more troubling than a single appointment. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This had been organized, carefully, quietly, and I had no idea how long it had been happening behind my back. The doctor did not hand me the file. Instead, she placed her palm over it, almost instinctively, as if shielding it from me. Mrs. Ellis, she said carefully, this is part of a coordinated care plan. It is designed to support you. Support me. I repeated, letting the words sit there for a moment. Then I stepped forward and reached for the edge of the folder before anyone could stop me. It slid an inch across the desk, just enough for me to see the first tab clearly. Housing. Beneath it, another tab, cognitive evaluation. My stomach tightened, but my voice stayed level. You are evaluating me for cognitive decline? I asked. The doctor hesitated again, and that hesitation told me more than any answer could. Rebecca stood up smoothly, placing a light hand on my arm, the gesture almost affectionate to anyone watching. "Margaret, let us not do this here," she said quietly. "We can talk about everything at home." I removed her hand, not abruptly, but deliberately. "No," I said, "we could talk about it here." Daniel shifted his weight near the door, glancing at his phone before slipping it into his pocket. "Mom, you are making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "We have already looked into a really nice place. It has a garden, activities, people your age." I turned to him, studying his face. There was no anger there. That would have been easier to understand. What I saw instead was something quieter, a kind of resignation, as if the decision had been made long before today, and he had simply learned to live with it. "You have already looked into it?" I asked. He nodded once. "We just want you somewhere safe." I let out a small breath and glanced back at the desk. The file was still slightly open from where I had pulled it. This time, I leaned in closer, ignoring Rebecca's sharp intake of breath, and read a line printed in bold near the top of the first page. Recommended transition date, June 15th. Today was May 3rd. That was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to move me out of my own house. 6 weeks to rewrite my life. "You scheduled this," I said, not looking at anyone in particular. "You set a date." Rebecca's voice came steady and measured. "We reserved a spot. These places have waiting lists. Margaret is just being practical." Practical. Another word that sounded reasonable until you felt what it was covering. I straightened up and adjusted the strap of my purse on my shoulder. The leather felt familiar, grounding. Inside were my keys, my checkbook, the grocery receipt from yesterday, proof of a life I was still fully living. "Doctor," I said, turning back to her, "did you assess me yourself, or are you relying on what they told you?" The room shifted. Again. This time, the nurse looked up. The doctor exhaled slowly. "We take family input into account," she said. "But yes, there was also a brief screening during your last visit." My last visit. I searched my memory. That had been after my minor surgery in February. I had still been groggy from the anesthesia, answering questions I barely remembered. Rebecca had been with me then, too. I felt something click into place, not loudly, but firmly. "I would like a copy of everything in that file," I said. Rebecca shook her head lightly, as if I had asked for something unnecessary. "Margaret, there is no need to get worked up over paperwork." I met her gaze, holding it. "There is every need," I said. Daniel stepped forward then, his voice lower. "Mom, why are you doing this?" I looked at him for a long second before answering. "Because someone already did something," I said. The doctor finally slid the file toward me, just a few inches, enough to signal a shift she could not quite stop. And as I reached for it, one thought settled clearly in my mind. If they had planned this much without telling me, then there was only one question left that mattered. What else had they already done that I did not know about? I took the file in both hands, feeling the weight of it more than I expected. It was not just paper. It was decisions, assumptions, and somewhere in there, a version of me that I did not recognize. I flipped it open slowly, careful, deliberate, like I was handling something fragile and dangerous at the same time. The first page was clean, clinical. Name, date of birth, insurance details. All correct, all ordinary. Then my eyes moved down to a section labeled observations. I read the first line once, then again. Patient exhibits increasing forgetfulness and reduced capacity for independent living. I let out a quiet breath through my nose. Reduced capacity. I repeated softly, more to myself than anyone else. Rebecca shifted beside me. "Margaret, these are just standard notes," she said. "They have to write something to justify the recommendation." I did not look up. I turned the page. There were check boxes: medication management, assistance recommended, financial oversight, supervision advised, housing stability, transition suggested. Each one neatly marked. Each one painting a picture of a woman who could not be trusted with her own life. I reached the next page and stopped. There was again a signature, not mine, Rebecca Ellis, written in confident, looping script beneath a line that read family representative authorization. My fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the paper. "You signed this," I said, finally lifting my eyes to her. She did not deny it. "Yes," she said simply. "Because someone had to." That answer settled in the room with a weight that felt heavier than anything else so far. Not defensive, not apologetic, just certain. I closed the file halfway and turned toward Daniel. "And you agreed to this?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I had seen since he was a teenager trying to explain a bad grade. "Mom, it is not like that," he said. "We talked about it. We just did not want to overwhelm you." I studied his face, searching for something familiar. I found it, but it was buried under something new. Distance. I remembered a different version of this same expression years ago, when he had come home from college unsure about his future. Back then, he had sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, asking me what he should do next. "You will figure out," I had told him. "It is your life." He had smiled then, relieved, like those words meant something. Now I wondered when that belief had changed. I placed the file back on the desk, but I did not let go of it completely. My hand stayed, resting on top, claiming it in a way I had not done before. "Doctor," I said, turning slightly, "how long has this been in progress?" She adjusted her glasses and glanced briefly at Rebecca before answering. "The initial notes were started in February, after your post-operative visit." February, the same visit where I had been groggy, answering questions between instructions about medications and follow-up appointments. I nodded once, slowly. That was not an accident. That was timing. I shifted my weight and straightened my shoulders. "So while I was recovering," I said, "you were building a case that I could not take care of myself." Rebecca exhaled softly, as if I was making this more complicated than it needed to be. "We were making sure you would be taken care of," she said. I met her gaze again, steady this time. "There is a difference," I said. The room felt smaller now, tighter, like the walls had moved in just enough to force everything into focus. I slid the file fully toward me and closed it with a firm motion. "I'm taking this," I said. The doctor hesitated, then nodded once. Daniel opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then stopped. Rebecca's expression did not change, but I saw something flicker there for just a moment. Not fear, not yet, but something close to recalculation. I picked up my purse, tucked the file under my arm, and stepped toward the door. My hand rested on the handle for a brief second before I turned back. "You said this started in February," I said. That was not the only paperwork I signed that week. No one answered, and that silence told me exactly what I needed to know. Whatever this plan was, it did not begin with that file, and it certainly did not end there. I did not say another word as I walked out of the clinic. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the warm air hit my face, carrying the faint smell of asphalt and cut grass. For a moment, I just stood there in the parking lot, the file pressed firmly against my side, my car keys already in my hand. Then I moved. I unlocked my Buick, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door with a quiet, solid click. Inside, everything felt familiar. The worn leather, the small rosary hanging from the rearview mirror, the stack of receipts tucked neatly in the center console. My space. My control. I placed the file on the passenger seat and stared at it for a few seconds before opening it again. This time I was not skimming. I was looking, page by page, line by line. About halfway through, I found something that made my breath slow down. A stapled packet labeled Legal Authorization, Durable Power of Attorney. I turned the page carefully. The document was dated February 18th, the same week as my surgery. My name was typed at the top, and at the bottom, there it was. A signature. Mine. Or at least, something that looked like mine. I leaned closer, narrowing my eyes. The letters were slightly uneven, the pen pressure inconsistent. I remembered that day in pieces. The hospital room, the beeping monitor, a nurse adjusting my four. Rebecca, standing near the window, holding a clipboard. "It is just standard discharge paperwork. Margaret," she had said. "They need a signature before you leave." I had been tired, foggy, trusting. I sat back slowly in my seat now, the memory settling into place with a clarity it had not had before. "You did not tell me what this was," I said quietly, though no one was there to hear it. I turned the page again. Under my signature, in clean, confident ink, was Rebecca's name, listed as primary agent. My grip tightened slightly on the paper. This was not just a recommendation. This was authority, legal authority. I reached into my purse and pulled out my reading glasses, sliding them on with steady hands. Then I checked the next section, effective immediately upon signing. No conditions, no secondary confirmation, nothing that required me to be declared unfit first. I let out a slow breath and looked up through the windshield. A man walked past, pushing a shopping cart toward the pharmacy next door, completely unaware that a few feet away, someone's entire life had just shifted on paper. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my recent bank notifications. Everything looked normal at first. Deposits, utility payments, grocery charges. Then I noticed something I had not paid attention to before. A scheduled transfer labeled Care Planning Reserve. $500. Set to repeat monthly. Starting 2 weeks ago. I frowned slightly and tapped into the details. The account it was linked to was not mine. It was a joint account I did not recognize. My pulse slowed, not from calm, but from focus. This was not about concern anymore. This was structure. Steps. Layers. I reached back to the file and flipped to the section behind the legal documents. There was a printed brochure tucked into the sleeve. Willow Creek Assisted Living, where comfort meets care. I studied the image. A neat building with white columns, people smiling on a manicured lawn, rocking chairs lined up on a porch. On the back, a handwritten note in Rebecca's precise handwriting. Unit 12B, reserved. Move in, June 15th. I set the brochure down carefully on the seat beside me. Reserved. Not suggested. Not considered. Reserved. I picked up my phone again, but this time I did not open my bank app. I opened my contacts and scrolled until I found a name I had not called in years. Harold Whitman, estate attorney. My late husband's attorney. The man who had helped us write our will 15 years ago. My thumb hovered over the call button for a second. Then I pressed it. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. And as I listened, I realized something with complete certainty. If Rebecca had already been given this much control, then the real question was not what she planned to do next. It was what she had already started changing that I had not even noticed yet. The line clicked, and a calm, familiar voice answered on the other end. Whitman and Associates, this is Harold. For a moment, I did not speak. Hearing his voice pulled me back years, to a time when decisions were made with me, not around me. Then I steadied myself. Harold, this is Margaret Ellis. There was a brief pause, followed by recognition. Margaret, it has been a long time. Is everything all right? I glanced at the file on the passenger's seat, at the brochure, at the neat handwriting that had already begun to map out the rest of my life. No, I said plainly. I believe something has been put in place without my full understanding, and I need you to look at it. His tone shifted immediately, more focused. All right, bring whatever you have. I am in the office until 5. I will be there within the hour, I replied, and ended the call. I started the engine, but before I could pull out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed again. Rebecca's name lit up the screen. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Margaret, where did you go? Her voice was controlled, but there was a tightness underneath it now. You left without finishing the appointment. I kept my eyes on the road ahead. I had what I needed. A short silence followed. We were going to go over next steps together, she said. There are documents that still need to be signed. That word again. Signed. I will review anything that needs my signature, I said, on my own terms. Another pause. Then she tried a different angle. Daniel is concerned. He thinks you are reacting emotionally. I almost smiled at that. Daniel can speak to me directly if he has concerns, I replied. He does not need a translator. The line went quiet for a beat longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had lost a layer of softness. Margaret, we are trying to help you avoid complications. If we delay too long, you could lose your placement at Willow Creek. That would not be ideal. I pulled out of the parking lot slowly, merging into the afternoon traffic. Then perhaps that placement was never ideal to begin with, I said, and ended the call before she could respond. I drove straight to downtown, The familiar streets tightening into narrower lanes lined with brick buildings and small storefronts. Harold's office was on the second floor of an older building with a brass plaque by the door. Whitman and Associates, Estate Planning and Elder Law. I parked at the meter, fed it a few quarters, and took the file with me inside. The hallway smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. When I stepped into his office, Harold stood up from behind his desk, older now, grayer, but still carrying the same steady presence I remembered. "Margaret," he said warmly, extending his hand. "Come in." I sat across from him and placed the file on his desk without ceremony. "I need you to tell me exactly what this gives her the right to do," I said. He opened the folder, adjusting his glasses as he scanned the first few pages. The room was quiet except for the soft rustle of paper. Then his expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. His brows drew together slightly, and he flipped to the legal authorization section more quickly. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "It was in my medical file," I said. He nodded once, slowly, and tapped the page with his finger. "This is a durable power of attorney," he said. "It gives your daughter-in-law broad authority over financial and medical decisions." I held his gaze, broad enough to move me out of my home. He did not answer right away. Instead, he turned another page, scanning further. When he finally looked up, his voice was measured. "Margaret," he said, "if this document is valid as it stands, she does not need your permission to begin making those arrangements." The words landed quietly, but they shifted everything in the room. I sat back in my chair, absorbing that. Not fear, not panic, just clarity. "Then we're not dealing with a plan," I said slowly. "We are dealing with control." Harold closed the file gently. "We are dealing with something that needs to be addressed immediately," he corrected. I nodded once, my mind already moving ahead. "Then we do not wait," I said. He reached for a notepad, pen already in hand. "There's one more thing you need to know before we take the next step," he said. And something in his tone told me that whatever came next would make everything I had just learned feel like the beginning, not the worst of it. Harold did not open the file again right away. Instead, he leaned back slightly in his chair, studying me in a way that told me he was measuring not just the situation, but me, whether I was ready to hear what came next. "Margaret," he said carefully, "this document gives Rebecca authority, but that authority is not absolute. It depends on how it was executed." I folded my hands in my lap, steady. "Explain that to me." He nodded once and turned the file back toward him, flipping to the signature page again. "If you signed this while fully informed and competent, it holds. But if there is any question about your capacity at the time, or if you were misled about what you were signing, then it can be challenged." I felt something shift, subtle but unmistakable. Not relief, direction. "You are saying this is not final," I said. "I am saying," he replied, tapping the paper lightly, "that this is only as strong as the circumstances surrounding it." I leaned forward slightly. I was coming out of anesthesia. I remember being told it was discharge paperwork. Nothing more. Harold's eyes sharpened. "Did anyone explain that you were granting decision-making authority?" "No," I said. "Not in any way that I understood." He nodded again, slower this time. "That matters." He reached for a legal pad and began writing a few notes in neat, precise lines. "We can request the hospital records from that day. There will be timestamps, staff notes, possibly even documentation of your condition when you signed." I watched his pen move across the page, each word he wrote feeling like a step forward instead of backward. "And if those records show I was not in a state to consent?" I asked. He looked up. "Then we have grounds to invalidate this power of attorney." The room felt different now, not smaller, sharper. I sat back, letting that settle in. "What about the financial transfers?" I asked, thinking of the account I'd seen on my phone. $500 a month, already scheduled. Harold paused mid-sentence. "Show me." I handed him my phone, the screen still open to the transaction details. He adjusted his glasses and studied it closely. "This account," he said, "is not in your name." "No, it'll be a..." And I did not authorize it. He handed the phone back to me, his expression tightening slightly. "Then we need to act quickly," he said, "because if she is already moving money, she is not waiting for June 15th. That date again. It had been a plan on paper. Now it felt like a deadline I had not agreed to. I stood up slowly, the chair sliding back with a soft scrape against the floor. Then we do not give her time, I said. Harold nodded, already turning to his desk drawer. He pulled out a folder of his own, thicker, older, with my name typed across the tab. Ellis Family Trust. I had not seen it in years. Your husband was very clear about one thing, Harold said as he opened it. He wanted you protected, not managed, not controlled. I felt a flicker of something I had not allowed myself yet. Not anger, not even sadness. Something steadier. Resolve. Harold flipped through several pages, then stopped and turned the document toward me. There is a clause here, he said, pointing to a section halfway down the page. It allows you to immediately revoke any previously granted authority and reassign control, provided you act before any irreversible transactions occur. I read the paragraph carefully, every word landing with precision. Immediate revocation. Reassignment. Control. I looked up at him. What do you need from me? I asked. He met my gaze directly. I need you to decide whether you are ready to move today, he said. Because once we start this, it will not stay quiet. I thought of Rebecca's calm voice, Daniel's avoidance, the brochure with Unit 12B already reserved. They had counted on me being slow, confused, cooperative. They had built everything around that assumption. I picked up a pen from Harold's desk and held it between my fingers, feeling its weight. They already moved, I said. I'm just catching up. Harold gave a small nod. Then let us get ahead. I lowered the pen to the paper, but before I signed anything, one more thought surfaced, sharp and undeniable. If Rebecca had gone this far without telling me, then she was not just planning for my future, she was already acting inside it. And that meant by the time I walked out of this office, there was a very real chance she would realize I was no longer under her control. It had been 2 days since I met with Harold, and the weight of the decision I had made still sat heavily on my chest. I had signed the papers to revoke the power of attorney, and with each passing hour, it felt like I had taken back control of my life. But in the back of my mind, I kept returning to one question. What would Rebecca do now? She had expected me to be slow, to react, maybe confused or passive, but I had moved quickly, and I could sense she was beginning to realize the ground was shifting beneath her feet. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table, I looked at the stack of papers in front of me. My husband's will, the family trust, the power of attorney, documents I had trusted for so long. All of it now felt like a map that had been redrawn without me. I wasn't just fighting to keep my home anymore. I was fighting to stay visible in a world where others had decided what I needed. I closed the folder and took a deep breath. Then the phone rang. The familiar ringtone echoed through the quiet house. I checked the caller ID. It was Daniel. I let it ring once, then answered. Mom. His voice was tight, and for the first time in days, I heard something different. I need you to come by the house. Rebecca wants to talk. About what? I asked, though I already knew. The tone in his voice made it clear. This wasn't a casual conversation. About the future, Mom. About where you're going to live. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood up and moved toward the window. The yard was quiet, still, the trees in the distance swaying lightly in the evening breeze. The world felt far away, as if the decision looming over me wasn't mine to make. But I knew this wasn't about a house anymore. This was about who got to control my choices. I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said, my voice firm. There was a long pause before Daniel spoke again. Please, Mom, just hear us out. I ended the call and grabbed my coat, feeling the weight of the moment. As I drove to their house, I couldn't shake the thought that something was coming. This wasn't just a conversation about a place to live. It was a confrontation. I parked in the driveway, and as I walked toward the door, I felt the cold evening air against my face. The front porch light was on, and the door stood ajar. Daniel was inside, standing near the entryway, his arms crossed over his chest. Rebecca was sitting on the couch, her expression unreadable. Mom, Daniel said, his voice a little softer now. Please sit down. I did, but I didn't let my guard down. I could feel the tension in the room, thick and palpable. What's this about? I asked. Rebecca folded her hands in her lap, her gaze steady. Margaret, we've been trying to do what's best for you, she said, her voice measured, but something about it felt off. We don't want you to be alone. We just think Willow Creek is the best place for you. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I studied her carefully, looking for the cracks in the smoothness of her words. And then I saw it, a small folder sitting on a coffee table, just beside her hand. It wasn't there by accident. The way it was placed, the way she kept her fingers near it, it was a signal. Without a word, I reached over and picked up the folder. Rebecca's eyes flickered for a second, a flash of something unspoken. I opened it slowly, deliberately. The first page was a printed email, a communication between the facility's director and Rebecca. The subject line, Willow Creek, confirmation of reserved unit. My eyes moved down the page. The unit number matched the one I had seen before. Unit 12B. I flipped through the pages, and there it was. A signed contract. My signature, bold and clear at the bottom. I looked up at Rebecca. You signed this? I asked. She didn't flinch. I signed it on your behalf, she said, her tone too calm. You were not in a position to make decisions at the time. I closed the folder slowly and looked at Daniel, who was avoiding my gaze. You knew about this? I asked. He looked up, but there was no apology in his eyes, only guilt. Mom, we thought it was for the best, he said, his voice strained. We thought you would understand. I stood up, feeling a coldness settling in my chest. Understand? You've been making decisions for me, Daniel. You've already planned my life, my home, my future. The silence between us stretched, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence before something shifted. I turned to Rebecca. You think I'll just let you take control? I asked. I didn't ask for any of this. Her eyes met mine, but she didn't speak. I could see the calculation behind her calm expression, but now it was clear to me. She had underestimated me. I wasn't just going to roll over and let her take everything. I had already made the first move. Now, it was time for the next step. This isn't over, I said, my voice quiet but firm. We're just getting started. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, the quiet of the house pressing in on me. The sound of the coffee maker filling the kitchen with a familiar, comforting smell didn't ease the tension in my chest. I had been up half the night, thinking through my next steps, considering what Harold had said, considering what I had seen with my own eyes. Rebecca had crossed a line. She had assumed she could control everything, from my home to my future, without me even knowing about it. But now the pieces were in motion, and I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was ready to act. As I sat down at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Daniel. Asterisk, Mom, we need to talk. It's time to discuss the next steps. Can you come by? Asterisk, I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. Asterisk, I'll be there in an hour. Asterisk, the pressure in my chest grew heavier with each passing minute. But I didn't flinch. I couldn't afford to show weakness now. When I arrived at their house, the door was already open. Rebecca was sitting at the dining table, flipping through a set of papers with a look of quiet satisfaction on her face. Daniel was nowhere to be seen. Margaret, please have a seat, she said, her voice calm, almost too calm. I could see the shift in her, the confidence that had settled in ever since she'd made the decision for me. She didn't even look up when I entered, as if I was already part of the plan she had set in motion. I walked over to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down without a word. I hope you've had time to think it over, Rebecca continued, finally looking up from the papers. We really do think Willow Creek is the best option. We're just doing what's necessary to make sure everything is taken care of. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the edge of the table. What's necessary? I asked. You've already made the decisions. You've already planned everything. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into that same controlled smile. We are trying to help you, she said, her tone unwavering. We want to make sure you're comfortable, safe. Safe. That word again. It used to mean something when it came from people I trusted. But now it felt like a trap, a justification for actions I had no part in. I'm not asking for help, I said, my voice steady but firm. And I don't need to be managed. I'm still capable of making my own decisions. Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached for the papers in front of her, pushing them toward me. These are the last steps, she said. All you need to do is sign. It's simple, really. It's just a formality. She gestured toward the first page. I picked up the pen and scanned the document. It was an updated power of attorney, the same type of document she had gotten me to sign before. But this one had a new clause. A clause that gave her full access to my financial accounts, my assets, everything. I didn't even need to look at it all to know what was happening. I'm not signing this, I said quietly, putting the pen down. Rebecca's expression didn't change. She just folded her hands together and leaned back in her chair. You need to, Margaret. You don't have a choice. My stomach tightened. The stakes were higher now. This wasn't just about me being sidelined anymore. This was about something far more serious, about control over everything I had left. I stood up slowly, placing my hand on the edge of the table. I'll sign nothing. Not until I see the legal documents I'm supposed to be agreeing to. Rebecca stood up too, the smile still in place, but with a coldness that made the room feel smaller. I've already signed everything that needs to be signed, she said, her voice low but certain. You don't have time to waste, Margaret. There are legal deadlines we need to meet. If you don't do this now, you might lose your chance at the placement. You'll be stuck. The pressure in the room increased, and for the first time, I saw the full extent of what she was trying to do. It wasn't about care anymore. It was about power. The power to make decisions without anyone questioning it. You've already moved everything behind my back, I said, my voice harder now. You think I won't fight back? Rebecca's gaze hardened, but she said nothing. It was clear. She thought she had already won. But the game had changed. I hadn't made all my moves yet. I haven't even begun to fight, I said, my voice sharp, filled with determination. I turned and walked toward the door, feeling the weight of every step I took. The decision had been made, and now I was the one controlling the next move. As I closed the door behind me, I knew something had shifted. They had no idea what was coming next. The next few days passed in a strange kind of quiet. I spent my time reviewing every document, every email, every scrap of information I could find about Willow Creek, about the power of attorney, about my assets. I had to know exactly what Rebecca had done, how far she had pushed her plan, and what was still within my control. But outwardly, I remained still. I didn't rush in with accusations. I didn't challenge her immediately. I let her think she had the upper hand. I let the pressure build without giving her a reason to act too quickly. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh pot of coffee in front of me, the file I had taken from Harold's office spread out before me. Each page was a reminder of how carefully Rebecca had orchestrated everything, how much she believed she could dictate my life without me even noticing. But I wasn't blind anymore, and I wasn't going to let this go on. I picked up the phone and dialed Harold's office. It rang twice before he picked up. Margaret, he said warmly, what can I do for you today? I need you to run a background check on Rebecca, I said, my voice low but firm. I want to know everything. Where she's been, what she's done, who she's involved with. All of it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Harold spoke. You're serious about this? I've been serious since the moment I saw that signed contract, I replied. I need to know what I'm dealing with before I make my next move. Harold was quiet for a moment, then sighed softly. I'll have my team get started on it right away. It might take a day or two to dig through everything. Good, I said. I'll be ready when you have the information. I hung up and set the phone down, staring at the papers in front of me. I didn't move for a long time, letting the silence fill the space. It was the calm before a storm, but this time I wasn't the one caught in the middle. I had a plan. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. The next day, I drove to the bank to check on the joint account I had seen on my phone. I needed to know if anything else had been moved around. When I walked into the branch, the teller greeted me warmly, and I asked for a statement on the account. The teller hesitated for just a second, but when I gave her my ID, she handed it over without a word. I sat in the small booth, flipping through the pages of transactions. There was another transfer. This one, even larger than the last. $1,000. Withdrawn 2 days ago from the same joint account. I felt my heart rate increase, but I kept my face neutral. The transfer was marked simply as care expenses, but there was no detail about what it was for. I tucked the statement into my purse, made a mental note to follow up, and walked out of the bank with a steady step. Rebecca thought she was in control, but I could see the cracks in her plan now. She had made a mistake. She had underestimated me. That evening, I returned home to find Daniel's car parked in the driveway. He was inside, sitting on the couch, staring at his phone when I walked in. "We need to talk, Mom," he said without looking up. "Not today, Daniel," I replied. "We're done talking for now." He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What does that mean?" I set my purse down and walked over to the table where the papers were still spread out. "It means you've already made your choice," I said, picking up the power of attorney document and flipping it in my hands. "But you're not going to get away with it." He stood up slowly, his hands going into his pockets. "What are you going to do?" "Well, I should have done from the start," I said, meeting his gaze. "I'm taking back control. This ends now." There was a long silence, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, doubt. It wasn't enough to change his mind, but it was a start. I could feel the shift. They were beginning to realize I wasn't as passive as they thought. I walked toward the door, leaving him standing there. "I'll be in touch, Daniel," I said, my voice cold. "And so will my lawyer." I closed the door behind me, the weight of the decision heavier than ever. I had given them time to believe they had won. Now it was time to take the first real step in turning everything around. This wasn't just about fighting back anymore. This was about reclaiming everything. And the next move was mine. The following week, everything seemed to escalate. I hadn't heard from Rebecca or Daniel in days, but I knew they were preparing something. I could feel it. They were playing their hand, making their next move, but so was I. I had been gathering my own pieces, putting together what I needed, and now it was time for the final reveal. That morning, I called Harold again. "It's time," I said, my voice steady, despite the nerves stirring in my chest. "I need everything. All the information you could get on Rebecca, her connections, anything tied to that transfer." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line before Harold responded. "I'll send you everything we have. It should be ready by the end of the day." "Good," I replied, hanging up without another word. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't the one caught in the web. They thought they had played me, but now I was playing them. That afternoon, I pulled into the driveway of the law office where I had arranged the meeting. The building was a tall, brick structure, the windows reflecting the sky above. As I walked in, I felt the weight of my decision more than I had in days. This was it, the final step. As I stepped into the attorney's office, I saw Harold sitting behind his desk, his papers neatly stacked, his glasses resting on the edge of his nose. "Margaret," he greeted me, his voice calm, but there was a slight edge to it. "Ready for this?" "Let's get it done," I said, sitting across from him, my hands folded in my lap. He slid a folder toward me. It was thick, filled with paperwork and printed emails. "We've got the information," Harold said. "Everything you asked for." I pulled it all. I took the folder and began flipping through the pages. The first few sheets were general, nothing unexpected. But then I came to a set of emails. One stood out, dated just 2 weeks ago. It was a thread between Rebecca and the head of the assisted living facility discussing the final arrangements for my placement. But it wasn't just about placement. There was mention of the funds transferred and how it was all set up under the guise of managing my estate. I froze. This wasn't just about taking my home. This was about controlling everything I had left, my assets, my future. I looked up at Harold. "This is it," I said, the realization settling in my chest. "She's been planning this for months." Harold nodded, a hint of understanding in his eyes. "This isn't just a power of attorney issue anymore. This is fraud." I closed the folder slowly, letting the weight of what he had just said sink in. "And you're sure?" I asked. "You can prove it." Harold met my gaze, his voice firm. "We've got enough to make a solid case. But we need to move quickly. If you wait too long, this could get buried." I stood up, the folder in my hands feeling like the key to everything. "Then it's time to act," I said, walking toward the door. Harold followed me, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I'll get the paperwork ready. It's time we made sure Rebecca realizes this game is over." As I walked out of the office, I felt the rush of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in weeks. Hope. Not for the first time, I understood what had been at stake all along. It wasn't just my house or my life. It was my autonomy, my dignity. And now, I was about to take back everything. I didn't know what Rebecca's next move would be, but I knew she was about to find out what it meant to underestimate me. And when she did, she would understand that no one gets to decide my future but me. The next day, I sat in my car outside the courthouse, the folder from Harold resting on the passenger seat. My mind was sharp, the adrenaline of the last few days still pumping through me. This was it, the moment when everything I had prepared for would finally come to a head. I wasn't just walking into that building for justice. I was walking in to reclaim my life. I pushed the door open and stepped out of the car, the late morning sun hitting my face. I didn't bother to check the time. I already knew I was early. I had come prepared. The plan was in motion. I made my way inside, passing the usual faces in the lobby. The receptionist smiled at me as I walked past, but I didn't stop. I knew exactly where I was going. As I entered the lawyer's office, Harold was already waiting for me. His usual calm demeanor was there, but this time I saw something different in his eyes. There was no uncertainty, no hesitation. He had the answers, and he was ready. "Margaret," he said, his voice even, "we've got the documentation." He handed me a thick folder, one I hadn't seen before. The papers inside were stacked neatly, but the weight of them felt different. This wasn't just about the power of attorney anymore. This was proof. I flipped through the pages quickly. The first page was a printed contract. At the top, the words Willow Creek Assisted Living Contract for Residency were boldly printed. My eyes moved down the page. The signature, not just mine but Rebecca's, right next to it in clear ink. My signature, yes, but it was the date that caught my eye. It was 3 months before my supposed decision was even made. She signed in my place? I asked, my voice tight. Harold didn't respond immediately, but his face told me everything I needed to know. "It gets worse," he said, pointing to the next page. I turned it, and there it was, a bank transfer. A transfer of $50,000 from my personal account, withdrawn without my knowledge or consent, listed under residential deposit for Willow Creek. The transaction had been completed the day after Rebecca signed the contract. The shock hit me hard, but I kept my face neutral. There was no denying it now. Rebecca had gone beyond overstepping boundaries. She had forged my signature and moved my money. This was no longer a question of manipulation. This was theft. I looked at Harold, my voice steady but filled with a new kind of determination. "We're going to expose her." Harold nodded, the flicker of approval in his eyes. "I'll file the motion today. The evidence is irrefutable." I stood up, the weight of the situation settling in, but this time it felt different. I was no longer a victim in this. The power had shifted. "You'll need to prepare the court order for the funds to be returned," I said, my gaze locked on him. "We can't just stop here. I'm getting everything back." Harold picked up the phone and dialed, his voice professional as he started laying the groundwork for what was to come. As I walked out of the office, I felt a surge of empowerment that I hadn't realized I was missing until now. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was my life being returned to me. I didn't know exactly how long it would take for Rebecca to realize what was happening, but I knew she would be caught in the storm soon enough. I could feel it in my bones. I had everything I needed now. There was no turning back. I stepped into the elevator, watching the doors close in front of me, and I knew with absolute certainty that this battle wasn't over. But I was ready, and when the truth came out, Rebecca would understand that no one could control me. Not anymore. It wasn't until the afternoon that I finally got the call. I had been sitting in my living room, the quiet of the house almost suffocating as I waited for Harold's confirmation. The phone rang, and I grabbed it on the first ring. "Margaret," Harold's voice came through, steady, but with an undercurrent of urgency. "The court order has been filed. I've also got confirmation. The money has been frozen, and we've got Rebecca's signature under investigation for fraud. This is officially in motion." I leaned back in my chair, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. But then, the anger hit me all at once. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal, the manipulation, the way she had made every decision as if I didn't matter, as if my voice was never going to be heard. The world I had known had been shattered, and in its place was the truth, raw and unforgiving. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was seething. I picked up my purse and walked out the door. There was no turning back now. I had to confront Rebecca. The drive to their house felt like it took forever. Every stoplight, every turn felt like it was dragging me deeper into the storm that had been building. When I finally arrived, I didn't bother to knock. I opened the door and walked straight inside. Rebecca was in the living room, sitting on the couch, her usual calm demeanor in place. But when she saw me, that mask slipped just a little. "Margaret," she said, standing up, "what are you doing here?" I slammed the folder onto the table in front of her, the papers inside spilling out onto the floor. "You don't get to lie to me anymore," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "You've been stealing from me, signing my name, moving my money." Her eyes widened, but she didn't back away. Instead, she folded her arms, her stance defensive, almost arrogant. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice flat. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I snapped. "You've been playing me from the start, using my trust, my name, to line your pockets. And now you think you can just get away with it." She stayed silent for a moment, her lips pressed tightly together. Then she spoke, her voice low but steady. "You were never going to see it coming, Margaret. You were too busy living in your little world, thinking things were fine. We were just trying to do what was best for you." I slammed my hand down on the table, making her jump. "Best for me?" I yelled. "You've been robbing me blind, and you call that best for me? I trusted you, Rebecca. I trusted you like family. And you don't get to say anything about it now," she shot back, her anger rising to meet mine. "It's done, Margaret. It's over. There's nothing you can do about it." My blood boiled as I stared her down, but this time I wasn't backing down. "You think you're in control?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. "You think you've won? You're wrong. This is just the beginning. I'm not just going to sit back and let you take everything." She laughed then, a harsh, humorless sound. "You're too late. The money's already gone. The papers are already signed. What are you going to do, Margaret? File a lawsuit? Swim in? You think the courts will side with you? Win? Not this time." The sound of the doorbell echoed through the house, breaking the tense silence that had settled in. I walked slowly to the door, the familiar, comforting click of my shoes against the hardwood floor grounding me. When I opened it, standing there in the doorway, was a police officer holding a piece of paper in his hand. "Margaret Ellis?" he asked, his voice firm but respectful. "Yes," I said, trying to suppress the surge of adrenaline rising in my chest. "You've been served," he said, handing me the papers. I glanced at them, my eyes quickly scanning the legal jargon. It was a restraining order, a legal demand that Rebecca cease all actions, including controlling my finances and property, effective immediately. The officer's presence felt like the final blow in a long, drawn-out battle that I had been fighting silently for weeks. Where is she? Arrogance that had driven her to do what she did. As the police car pulled away, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't just about getting back what was rightfully mine. It was about the certainty that justice had been served. No more manipulation. No more lies. Just the consequences of her actions coming to fruition. I stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of the empty house, the silence of everything that had happened. Then I turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind me with a soft click. The battle was over. The war had been won. I had regained everything: my home, my dignity, my control. And as I sat back down at the kitchen table, I realized that for the first time in months, I could breathe easy again. The fight had been long, but it had been worth it. And now I was finally free.